I woke up on the morning of my 18th birthday with a strange flutter in my chest, like hope trying to stand up after being shoved down for years. The sunlight leaking through my curtains felt warmer than usual, gentler somehow, as if even the universe wanted to whisper, "Today is yours." I lay still for a moment, letting myself imagine what it would feel like if my parents were downstairs right now, waiting to say happy birthday to me. Maybe even surprise me with breakfast. Maybe just remember. The thought alone made me smile, foolishly, as I would soon discover. When I stepped into the hallway, the illusion cracked. My sister's clothes were scattered everywhere, her makeup smeared across the walls from a rushed morning routine. My parents' bedroom door was open, empty. No murmurs, no footsteps, no card on the table like I always imagined growing up. Just silence. I walked into the kitchen. The calendar on the fridge, the one I stopped writing my birthday on years ago because I wanted them to remember on their own, was filled with scribbles of my sister's events. Dance practice. Picture day. Study group. My name wasn't anywhere, not even in the margins. I shouldn't have been surprised. But the sting still landed. I made coffee, like always. Poured half for my mom because she'd complain later that no one thought about her needs. I cooked eggs for my sister because she refused to eat them unless I made them not too dry and not too soft, just right. I wasn't thanked. I never was. But I kept doing it, because somewhere deep down, I believed that being useful was the only way to stay visible. At 11:07 a.m., my mom walked in, groggy, yawning, stretching like a cat. She thanked me for the coffee without looking at me. She didn't notice the date. My dad came in 5 minutes later, kissed my sister on the head, grunted at me, and grabbed his keys. He didn't notice either. It was my 18th birthday. The most important birthday of my life so far. And not even a flicker of recognition crossed their faces. But I still held on to hope. Maybe they were planning something for later. Maybe they had a surprise. Maybe they at least remembered enough to pretend. I held on to that hope until 3:22 p.m., the exact moment my sister came home early from school, stomping through the door like she owned the house. Her face was red, her eyes wet with freshly summoned tears, her voice already rising before her backpack hit the floor. "They humiliated me," she screamed. "Everyone hates me." My mom gasped as if the world were ending. My dad rushed to her like she had been stabbed. I stood in the living room doorway, invisible. My sister wailed dramatically, clutching her hands to her chest. "I can't go anywhere tonight. I can't." Her voice broke on the last word, perfectly timed. My mom stroked her hair. "Then we won't go anywhere, baby. We'll cancel everything. You need to rest." I felt my breath freeze mid-inhale. "Cancel everything. Cancel my birthday." Dad nodded. "She's right. There's no point in forcing plans tonight. No point. Plans that I made. Plans that I paid for with my own savings. Plans they didn't even remember existed." My mom didn't look at me when she said it. My dad didn't either. My sister definitely didn't. She just sniffled, soaking in their attention like it was her birthright. I waited for someone to remember what today was, to realize what they had just done. To feel even a flicker of guilt. Nothing. They turned their backs to me and walked away, all three of them disappearing into my sister's room while she continued her theatrical sobbing. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the bags of decorations I had hidden behind the couch, the ones they didn't even notice. I stared at my own hands as if they belonged to someone else. Something inside me didn't shatter. It didn't scream. It didn't rage. It simply went quiet. A quiet so deep it felt like standing at the bottom of a frozen lake. For 18 years, I kept telling myself they loved me, they just forgot sometimes, they just got distracted, they just needed me to be patient. But the truth slid over me like a cold shadow. I was a placeholder. A background character. A convenience. And suddenly the thought of staying, of spending one more day in that house, felt suffocating, I turned, walked to my room, and closed the door silently behind me. I stared at the little string lights over my bed, the ones that made me feel warm at night, and wondered how many more years I was supposed to pretend this was normal. My 18th birthday wasn't ruined. It simply never existed for them. And that hurt more than anything. I closed my bedroom door softly, not because anyone would notice the noise, but because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of reacting. It was strange, how quickly numbness could settle into a person. One moment I was an 18-year-old girl hoping for a birthday cake, and the next I was someone else entirely. Someone who didn't want to stay where she wasn't wanted. The voices from my sister's room drifted down the hall, her sniffles, my mother's soothing coos, my father's low murmurs. They were all gathered there, orbiting her, feeding her drama like it was oxygen. It had always been like that. She had tantrums, I had silence. She got applause, I got responsibility. She was the sun, I was the shadow no one cared to look at. But shadows could move. And I was done standing still. My suitcase was old, scuffed, and a little too small, but it was enough. I pulled it from under my bed, wiping away a thin layer of dust. I moved mechanically, like I'd practiced this moment in secret 1,000 times. Maybe I had, in the corners of my mind I never dared visit until now. I folded clothes with a precision that surprised me. Shirts, jeans, my one nice dress, a few sentimental items. My documents went into a folder. The small stash of money from my part-time job, tips I had been quietly collecting, hiding, saving, slipped into an envelope inside my bag. I packed my phone charger, my worn-out sneakers, the little stuffed bear I told myself I had outgrown but never truly did. Every choice felt final in a soft, eerie way. No theatrics. No rush. Just a tired girl deciding she was done being the ghost in her own home. While I packed, the house buzzed with chaos that didn't involve me. My mother's anxious voice rose, my father tried bargaining with my sister, and my sister elevated her sobs dramatically whenever she felt a tension slipping. The entire world revolved around her meltdown. Not one knock on my door. Not one check-in. Not one question. If they didn't realize my birthday was today, they certainly wouldn't notice me leaving. I zipped the suitcase slowly, deliberately, savoring the sound. It felt like the final stitch being pulled out of a wound. When I opened my bedroom door, my heart didn't race. I felt oddly weightless, as if the disappointment had drained out of me entirely, leaving only clarity behind. I tiptoed down the hallway, though no one could hear me over the noise. My sister's door was cracked open, and through it I saw my mother hugging her, stroking her hair like she was a child, whispering promises of making everything better. My father stood awkwardly nearby, holding a cup of tea he probably made for her. None of them turned toward me. I walked right past the doorway. Invisible, as always. At the front door, I hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of grief. The kind you feel when you finally accept the truth you've been avoiding your whole life. Leaving wasn't losing them, it was admitting they were never really mine. I opened the door slowly. No creak, no slam, just a gentle shift. The outside air hit my face, cool and crisp, carrying the scent of the neighbor's jasmine bush. I stepped out onto the porch, my suitcase wheels softly clicking on the wood. For a heartbeat, I waited, half hoping, half knowing, someone might call after me. Where are you going? Are you okay? Stay. Nothing. Not even a pause in my sister's dramatic performance. I descended the steps and walked down the street with the kind of resolve I didn't know I could possess. The world looked different already. Quieter. Bigger. I had been saving for months, scraping together dollars from tutoring and late-night diner shifts. I'd found a small room for rent a few blocks away from where I worked, a tiny space above a retired woman's garage. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean, safe, and mine. I'd visited once when my parents were busy arguing over my sister's latest demand. I signed the rental papers early that week. I didn't think I'd need them so soon. But maybe a part of me always knew I would. When I arrived, the landlady opened the door with a warm smile. Oh honey, you packed lightly, she said kindly. I tried to smile back, but it wobbled. It's all I need. She didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. She led me upstairs, helped me settle in, handed me a spare blanket. The room was small and a little drafty, the walls painted a pale yellow that reminded me of faded sunlight. But when I closed the door behind me, the quiet felt peaceful. I sat on the edge of the new bed, fingers tracing the stitched quilt. For the first time that day, tears finally spilled, quiet ones, thin and trembling, dripping down my chin onto my hands. Not because I regretted leaving, but because I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of the years spent being an afterthought. My phone buzzed once. A notification from the cupcake shop reminding me my order was delivered. To a house where no one would even open the box. I turned my phone off. No calls. No texts. No one noticed my absence. And as the silence wrapped around me like a blanket, something inside me shifted. The numbness didn't stay numb. It grew roots. It became strength. I looked around my little room and whispered into the stillness, "This is the first place that's mine." And I realized I didn't leave without a sound. They just never listened. The days after I left felt unreal at first. I kept waiting for a message, a missed call, a question, anything that might indicate I had been noticed. But the silence from my parents was absolute, a void so deep it almost made me laugh. They didn't even realize their dependable daughter, the one who held the entire household together without complaint, had vanished. For the first week, I checked my phone too often. I told myself I wasn't hoping, they didn't deserve that, but habit is hard to kill. Every time I saw an empty notification bar, something inside me twisted, then loosened. Eventually, the numbness turned into acceptance. Meanwhile, without me there to cushion every blow or clean every mess, my family's so-called harmony started unraveling faster than even I predicted. I didn't hear about it directly, of course. But news always finds a way to travel in small neighborhoods. The landlady's niece worked at my sister's school and was more than happy to share the chaos each afternoon when she visited. She never mentioned my name, no one connected me to the crumbling household I'd escaped, but she described everything in astonishing detail. Her little sister had a meltdown in the hallway again today, she said one evening as she carried in groceries. Screaming about how the teacher didn't let her redo her assignment. Poor thing almost made half the class cry. I smiled into my cup of tea. Poor thing. That girl had grown up believing the world should bend around her. Without me smoothing every rough edge, she was discovering just how sharp life could be. Another day, the landlady mentioned my mother missing work, twice. She was always bragging about holding everything together, she said, shaking her head. Now she's late because she can't get her younger daughter out of bed in the mornings. I told her, kids only act like that when they've never learned consequences. I stayed quiet, but inside, something warm flickered. It wasn't joy, more like justice finally breathing after being suffocated for years. A week later, I passed by the grocery store after my shift and overheard two neighbors talking near the produce section. "Did you hear about the Wilsons?" one whispered. "The older daughter hasn't been seen in days. And the younger one had another tantrum in the parking lot. Knocked over a cart of oranges." The parents looked so tired, the other replied. Like they aged 10 years. I walked past them without turning my head, but inside, I felt a strange, quiet vindication. They were finally living the reality they had always dumped on me. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. My sister's tantrums escalated now that no one cleaned up after them. She screamed at teachers, slammed doors at home, refused to do chores, refused to eat meals unless they were made exactly the way she liked. And without my invisible labor, the household tipped off its axis. My mother began snapping at neighbors, at coworkers, even at her friends. She had always cared about appearances, but exhaustion made her careless. The cracks began showing in public. My father, always the calm one, always detached, finally realized he couldn't pretend the family was perfect anymore. He was coming home later from work, not because of overtime, but because staying at the office was easier than going back to the emotional hurricane he had helped create. Bills started piling up because my sister refused to go to her part-time tutoring sessions unless I was the one driving her, even though I wasn't there. My mother begged, bargained, pleaded. Nothing worked. My sister had been raised in a world that revolved around her. Now that the rotation had stopped, she was falling apart. The neighbors talked. The teachers complained. The school counselor called home weekly. My parents fought behind closed doors, but thin walls never hid anything in that house. People could hear. People did hear. Their perfect life, polished, organized, enviable, was collapsing under the weight of its own illusions. And the best part? They still hadn't noticed I was gone. Not until the third week. It was a Sunday when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. When I answered, my mother's frantic voice spilled through the speaker. "Where are you? Why haven't you come home? Your sister is inconsolable, your father is stressed, the house is a mess, how could you disappear like this?" A laugh slipped out of me before I could stop it. It was small, quiet, almost sad. She still didn't understand. She wasn't calling because she missed me. She was calling because the machine had broken, and suddenly the absence of the silent worker mattered. "I didn't disappear," I said softly. "You just never looked." She fell silent for a full 5 seconds, an eternity for a woman who had an opinion on everything. Then she demanded I come home. But I didn't. Instead, I listened to the desperation edging into her voice, the unraveling, the panic of realizing the stable daughter she always relied on wasn't returning to fix everything. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was simply the truth finally catching up to them. And as I hung up the phone and looked around my tiny but peaceful room, I felt something new bloom in my chest, something I never felt growing up in that house. Freedom. Not the dramatic kind. Not the rebellious kind. Just the quiet, steady freedom of knowing their world was falling apart. And for once in my life, I wasn't the one expected to save it. My mother called every other day after that first frantic phone call. At first, her voice brimmed with indignation, like I had personally insulted the entire family by daring to remove myself from their orbit. She kept demanding that I stop being dramatic and come home right now, as if running from years of neglect was something I owed them an apology for. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, anger would have given them more power, but because I was finally learning the value of silence. My silence was the one thing they couldn't control, the one thing they didn't expect from me. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I didn't plead. I simply stopped being available. My father tried once. His message was short, as if he didn't have the emotional vocabulary for anything else. "We need to talk. Come home." Need. Not want. Not miss. Not care. Just need. I deleted the message and sat on my bed in my tiny rented room, the soft yellow walls glowing under the warm lamp. This space was nothing impressive, slanted ceiling, old plumbing, a window that stuck when it rained, but every inch of it was mine. Mine, in a way the entire family house had never been. For the first time, I felt like I existed. Weeks passed, and the cracks in their perfect life widened into gaping fractures. The landlady's niece mentioned that my sister had been suspended for screaming at a teacher during a test. My mother had shown up at the school, embarrassed and exhausted, trying to defend her. She hadn't succeeded. My father had been called out of work for the 3rd time that month. His boss was reportedly losing patience. The neighbors had begun avoiding my mother because every interaction turned into venting about her ungrateful children. I wasn't surprised she used the plural, everything in her world always extended only as far as what she needed. One evening, as I walked home from my shift at the cafe, I saw a shape sitting on the steps of the building. As I got closer, I realized it was my father. He was hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground like he expected answers to sprout from the concrete. I considered turning around, pretending I didn't see him. But the street was too quiet, the moment too sharp. He lifted his head when he heard my footsteps. For a split second, relief washed over his face, relief, and then something resembling shame. "There you are," he said softly. I leaned against the railing, keeping distance. "I live here." He nodded, swallowing hard. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of years had finally settled on his shoulders now that I wasn't there to hold them up. "We didn't know where you went," he said. "Your mother is worried." "Your sister. She noticed I'm gone now?" He flinched. "Just barely. But I saw it." "You left without saying anything." "I left without anyone noticing," I corrected. He looked down at his hands. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, in a voice roughened by something like regret, he said, "Things have been difficult at home since you left." I shrugged. "They were difficult when I was there. You just didn't see it." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally said, "We need you to come back." There it was, that word again. Need. Not want. Not love. Not miss. Need. For what? I asked. To clean? To fix? To help her through tantrums? To be the buffer for all the problems you don't want to face? His silence was the closest thing to honesty he'd ever given me. "When you were home, things worked," he said quietly. "You held everything together." I almost laughed. That was the first time he had ever acknowledged it. The irony tasted bittersweet. "That wasn't my job," I said. "I was a child." "Your child. Not your solution." He lifted his gaze to mine, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw something like understanding behind his eyes. But understanding was not the same as change. It was simply recognition far too late to matter. "We're asking you to come home," he said again, but softer this time. "Your mother is falling apart." "She's falling apart," I said, "because she's finally dealing with the consequences she always shoved onto me." He didn't deny it. He couldn't. I looked at him, the man who had always taken the easy way out, always let my mother dominate the emotional landscape, always allowed my sister to rule the house with her tantrums. He was not cruel, just cowardly. And cowards rarely changed. "I'm not coming back," I told him. "Not now. Not ever." His shoulders sagged. Not in anger this time. In resignation. Maybe it was the first real moment of humility I'd ever seen from him. "Is that your revenge?" he asked softly. "Leaving us like this?" I shook my head. Revenge would be going back and letting myself be destroyed all over again. Revenge would be pretending nothing happened. Leaving isn't revenge. He frowned slightly. "Then what is it?" "Peace," I said. "My peace." He didn't try to follow me when I walked past him and opened the building door. He didn't call after me. I think he knew it wouldn't change anything. Inside my room, I sat on my bed and breathed slowly, deeply, letting the silence wash over me. Not the lonely silence I grew up with, the empty silence of being ignored, but a warm, comforting quiet. A quiet I chose. Over the next few weeks, I lived my life. I worked. I studied. I cooked for myself. I met new people. I laughed more, cried less, and found small joys in things like morning sunlight, fresh tea, the landlady's garden. Every day, I built myself piece by piece, away from the shadow of the family that had never truly seen me. And as their world continued crumbling without me, I realized my sweetest revenge was the simplest one. I wasn't suffering with them anymore. I wasn't cleaning up the consequences. I wasn't the invisible glue holding together a house that had never been a home. My revenge was happiness, quiet, steady, and entirely my own. And the best part? They had to live every day knowing the moment I walked away. Their perfect life fell apart without me.